لا الہ الا اللہ محمد رسول اللہ کی لازوال درس گاہ حسین ہے، نہ جس کی کوئی مثال ہے، نہ جس کی کوئی نظیر ہے، وہ بے مثال شہنشاہ حسین ہے، نہ جس کی کوئی مثال ہے، نہ جس کی کوئی نظیر ہے، وہ بے مثال شہنشاہ حسین ہے۔ حسین روح کائنات ہے، حسین فخر معجزات ہے، خدا نے جس کو مرحبا ہے نفس مطمئن کہا، وہ کربلا کا مصطفیٰ حسین ہے۔ حسین لا الہ کی زندگی، حسین انبیاء کی بندگی، حسین لا الہ کی زندگی، حسین انبیاء کی بندگی، لا الہ سے پوچھ لو کہ ساری کائنات میں، لا الہ سے پوچھ لو کہ ساری کائنات میں، صرف بنا لا الہ حسین ہے۔ حرم میں حشر کا سما ہوا، پھی سے جب سکینہ نے کہا، مجھے نہ نیند آتی ہے، میں سوں کس کے سینے پر، مجھے نہ نیند آتی ہے، میں سوں کس کے سینے پر، کہاں چلا گیا میرا حسین ہے۔ اے ہاشمی جوانوں کیا ہوا، کہاں چلے گئے ہو باوفا، اے ہاشمی جوانوں کیا ہوا، کہاں چلے گئے ہو باوفا، صدا یہ فاطمہ کی تھی کہ رن میں کوئی بھی نہیں، صدا یہ فاطمہ کی تھی کہ رن میں کوئی بھی نہیں، اکیلا رہ گیا میرا حسین ہے۔ پڑی ہے رن میں لاشیں جا بجا، جلے خیام کچھ بھی نہ بچا، حرم کے سر سے چھین لی یزیدیوں نے چادریں، حرم کے سر سے چھین لی یزیدیوں نے چادریں، یوں کربلا میں لٹ گیا حسین ہے۔ حسین دین کا شباب ہے، حسین درد کی کتاب ہے، کفن کے بند کھول کر بلایا جس کو ماں نے خود، وہ فاطمہ کا لاڈلا حسین ہے۔ اپنے خون کا غسل ملا، کفن ہے جس کا خاک کربلا، دفن بہن نہ کر سکی ہے دھوپ میں پڑا رہا، دفن بہن نہ کر سکی ہے دھوپ میں پڑا رہا، یہ وہ غریب کربلا حسین ہے۔ سلام۔
محمد علی محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم۔ بولی ماں کیا ہوا، سکینہ کو غشیے کیوں آ گیا، سکینہ کو کیوں یہ خاموش ہو گئی، آخر کس نے کیا کہہ دیا، سکینہ کو کس نے کیا کہہ دیا، سکینہ کو کیا خبر، اس کو کیا ہوا بیٹا، دیکھو آب ذرا، سکینہ کو دیکھو آب ذرا، سکینہ کو نہ شکایت ہے اب تماچوں کی، نہ رسن کا گلا، سکینہ کو نہ رسن کا گلا، سکینہ کو ہائے غربت میں چھین کر مجھے سے لے گئی کیوں خزاں، سکینہ کو لے گئی کیوں خزاں، سکینہ کو بولی ماں کیا، جب داغ بے کسی نہ سکینہ اٹھا سکی، اور درد دل نہ خوف کے مارے سنا سکی، کھائے تماچے شمر کے جب تک کھا سکی، سین کم تا دکھ بہت نہ برداشت لا سکی، روئی تو ظالموں نے جفا بے شمار کی، آخر یہ جبر دیکھ کے موت اختیار، آخر یہ جبر دیکھ کے موت اختیار کی، دل میں سما گیا تھا جو شمر لیں کا ڈر، سونے میں कांप कांप ये कहती थी रात भर, फरियाद छीनता है गौहर शुम्र बदगौहर, आता इब्न साथ छिप जाके मैं, आता इब्न साथ छिप जाके मैं किधर। ज़ैनब पुपी संभालो कलेजा धड़कता है, सज्जाद भाई देखो ये खोली गुराक, सज्जाद भाई देखो ये खोली गुराकता है। चुपती तो चुपती बोलती थी डरी हुई, वाशेम्र आया तन में इधर थरथरी हुई, तियाह बाद बाद में लब पर धरी हुई, गर्दन की रीस मान लहू से भरी हुई। दम रुकने लगता था तो रसन खोल देते थे, बाहर जो शुम्र बोलता तो बांध ले, बाहर जो शुम्र बोलता तो बांध लेते थे। जिंदा से कहती थी ये कभी वो असीर गम, हो जाएगा कल एक तेरा मेहमान का। मैयत किसी की नन्ही सी निकलेगी सोबदा, बानों से ये खिताब कविता बचा आश में नाम, एक ताजा मौत होएगी नबी के घराने में, अम्मा लुटोगी आज की शब कैद खान, अम्मा लुटोगी आज की जब कैद खाने में। अब क्या लुटूंगी माल, नहीं जर नहीं रहा, अकबर नहीं रहा, अली असगर नहीं रहा, रहने को कैद खाना मिला घर नहीं रहा, हाथों मेरी इसमां बंदी जेवर नहीं रहा। दौलत है कौन सी जिसे जिंदा में खोंगी, रोना था जिसको रो चुकी अब किसको रोंगी। अब मौत मेरी सबको मुबारक करे खुदा, मरते ही मेरे खैर से सपन हो रहा, जाता रहा बुखार बरादर का बेदवा, जन्नत को हम रवा हो मदीने को, जन्नत को हम रवा हो मदीने को आखिरबा। गुल हो सकीना लेके बला सब की मर गई, हैदर की पोती मुश्किलें आसान कर, हैदर की पोती मुश्किलें आसान कर गई। मोहम्मद वाले
صلوات. مولا عباس کی شان میں کچھ فضائل. اتنی بھر جائے ان آنکھوں میں ضیائے عباس، مجھ کو کوئی نہ نظر آئے سوائے عباس. میرے الفاظ میں کیوں ہونا روانی کا کمال، میرے الفاظ میں کیوں ہونا روانی کا کمال. میں نے دریاؤں سے سیکھی ہے ثنائے عباس. کربلا ایک ہی مصرعے میں سنا سکتا ہوں، کربلا ایک ہی مصرعے میں سنا سکتا ہوں. عزم زینب دل شبیر وفائے عباس. میں نے اس حسن و شباہت پہ بہت غور کیا، میں نے اس حسن و شباہت پہ بہت غور کیا. سوچتا ہوں کہ علی لکھ دوں بجائے عباس. آخری سانس جو توبہ کے لیے ہوتی ہے، آخری سانس جو توبہ کے لیے ہوتی ہے، میں نے وہ سانس بھی رکھ لی ہے برائے عباس. اتنی بھر جائے ان آنکھوں میں ضیائے عباس. پر محمد وآل محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم.
Jaffer to start the lectures. We're honored to have him all the way from UK. So please benefit from his lectures and please welcome him with a loud salawat. And just one quick announcement, similar to yesterday, Arba'in Jalus will be happening on the 3rd of September on Sunday. So after namaz Zohrain, is that correct? Third? Third. After namaz Zohrain in Boston Coffee, please contact Boston Common. Please contact the Zine, or from the Eastside Partners Money if you want to donate or help volunteer for that event. For Muhammad Wali Muhammad Salawat.
For the love of our second holy Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba, Sallu ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا أبي عبد الله الحسين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. Yesterday, we began our three-part series in which we are talking about the potential of a bona fide fiqh of environmental law from a Shi'i perspective. We stated yesterday that we know that from the perspective of humanity at large, there is no graver, more urgent concern than that of climate change and global warming. And we can see the effects of that in front of us in terms of the decimation of species, in terms of the shifting in weather patterns, in terms of how the number of deaths have already begun, and even climate migration has already occurred because of the impending challenges that are upon us. What we find, however, is that from a Shia perspective, we have not yet really produced a work that helps the Shia world navigate this particular challenge. We haven't provided significant enough guidance. We have not yet even created a bab of fiqh which helps us to think about our obligations and our duties. And yesterday, we scoped out the potential of what a chapter of fiqh that gives us guidance on those things that might be wajib for us, or might be haram for us, might be mustahab for us, or might be makruh for us. In the legal perspective, as a shari'i duty, we scoped out what that might look like and how actually a mujtahid or marja' ad-dini, actually scopes out a chapter of fiqh. We gave the example yesterday of Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Taqi al-Mudarrisi. May Allah preserve him, the marja of Karbala. And we mentioned that in his works, he argues that when the waqi' changes, when the reality shifts, it is possible to abolish an entire group of laws that are no longer applicable or working. And similarly, it is possible to create an entire chapter of laws because the demand or the necessity is there. And then he goes on further to state that in the context of shura, there is the idea of participatory law, meaning that it's not only the marja that creates the law and then feeds down to us. Rather, when a community or a people want to participate in the creation of a law, or they are more mature than maybe others, they can actually think about what they would expect from themselves as duties, and it is thus possible for the marja to be able to create that as law because one group of people are willing to do more than another. This is participatory law. Imagine here we have a conversation and we realize that there are certain duties upon us. It may be in other parts of the world they don't see the same vision yet. They haven't got to the same grips of the discussion yet, which is not impossible to say. If I was to meet, for example, with people in Mombasa or Dar es Salaam, or I was to go to some Husseiniya in Basra, or if I was to go and speak to people in a different part of the world, they may not necessarily appreciate some of the topics the way you and I appreciate them or experience them. But if a group is willing to be able to do more, it is possible for their own experience to help cultivate and shape a law, or their own willingness to do more helps them to cultivate and shape a particular law. And this is the idea behind participatory law in Shi'ism, meaning that when you and I actually are in agreement with doing something, it is possible for us to be able to legislate something upon ourselves, and the marja is able to help scope that out with us. Now, having understood this is a backdrop, as an introduction, that the idea of creating a bona fide chapter of fiqh al-bi'ah, environmental law and climate law is possible, we then have to go back to the way climate law is actually being scoped out today, and certain demands are being made on nation states, on companies, and upon individuals. You probably all heard of things like the Paris Agreement, which tries to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees C or less, which was above pre-industrial times. Nations have signed an agreement to be able to keep their contribution of the amount of gases and their contribution to global warming to a certain level. And so they begin to shift their technologies, they begin to create laws and demands upon us as citizens so that we begin to create a change in behavior, and that the way in which we interact with power grid or the way in which we start to make certain purchases, we shift our behaviors accordingly. Instead of us buying gas guzzling cars, there is investment from government into greener technologies so that we can eventually move out older technologies that cause more damage and harm to the planet and bring in newer technologies. You've all seen this. As an example, in London, I don't know if you come across this, it's a very controversial issue for some people because, as you know, those people who are on the sort of far right, or those people who are very hard of thinking, when they see sort of certain environmental programs, they speak out against it. And they do this because it's a political potato, isn't it? It's a hot issue that politicians get to be able to talk about and create a lot of discussion around. So in London, as an example, there is what's called an ultra low emission zone. Have you come across this? Have you heard about this? called ULEZ, Ultra Low Emission Zone. In the entirety of London, the London mayor, who happens to be a Muslim, by the way, by the name of Sadiq Khan, or how he often is known as Siddiq Khan, Sadiq Khan actually helped push through this idea of an ultra-low emission zone, and two major things happen. If you have a car that is a gas guzzler, or an older car, an older engine that actually causes more emissions, every time you drive into London, you will be charged a certain amount. I can't remember the exact amount, but it's something like 12 or 14 pounds. Every time you drive anywhere into London, the camera will take a picture, and if your car is older than a certain age or has a certain amount of emissions, then you will have to pay a sort of fine or a charge for that. And as an incentive to be able to scrap your older cars with sort of older engines, there is a financial incentive that is given to these drivers so that you scrap the old car and you actually invest in cars that are newer with better technology. Okay? So the purpose of this is, number one, to be able to try to meet the targets of things like the Paris Agreement, so that Britain can do its part in reducing its emissions, so that we can actually reduce the global warming that we are creating. But also, according to university studies, there's about 30,000 deaths a year in Britain, 30,000 deaths a year, specifically due to poor quality of air. So this is very important if you begin to understand the link. Science is telling us that the gas guzzling cars that we are using in London can actually be a source of death for people, early death for people. Why? Many people have been triggered with asthma attacks. Many people who are exposed to poor air quality affects their lungs. And in the medium term, it can actually cause around 30,000 deaths a year. Children as well as adults. So now we have a mayor that is actually creating a policy or implementing a policy that helps us to be able to scrap older cars, bring in newer technologies. Of course, those people who are hard of thinking and those people who are on the far right hate it, because for them there is no such thing as global warming and climate change. Whereas those people who are more attuned to the science and sympathetic to human life, they will obviously try to be able to promote this cause. And even though it might cause them a bit of financial harm in the short to medium term, we understand that there is a bigger issue at play. If I am potentially going to cause death and harm, it is better for me to pay for a newer car or a greener car, because ultimately I know that I may be causing great harm, grievous harm to someone, if I don't make change in my life. So on the balance of things, which one is more important? Or, as we stated yesterday, from the Islamic perspective, what is my duty? Forget left and right politics. It doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican here. The question is, from an Islamic duty, if I know that my behavior is actually going to cause grievous harm and potentially death, and there is an opportunity to change my behavior, even though it costs me a certain amount, between me and Allah on the day of judgment, when He asks me and He says, you knew that your gas guzzling car was causing harm at a planetary level. Why did you not change it? Why did you not invest in a greener car to reduce your emissions? What will you say on the day of judgment? Think about this question very carefully. On the day of judgment, the child who was the daughter of a polytheist will have the right to be asked, for what reason was I killed? بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. Correct or not? What reason did you put me to death? Was my life not important? What happens to a child who suffers with severe asthma, or an adult who suffers with severe asthma, and my gas guzzling car is actually a cause for severe harm, or God forbid, even death? 30,000 deaths a year in the UK alone, just in accordance with air pollution, poor quality of air. Do you not think that child will have a right on the Day of Judgment to ask me, why did you not bother to change your car? بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. You think only those people who are buried alive will have a right to ask, why was I killed? Why was I harmed? Is that the way Allah's justice works? No. So you can see here that immediately arises a tension between the acts that we are doing and the duties that we have upon us to be able to preserve life and reduce harm. When I say a tension, what I mean is that there's a conflict. I want the car that I want. I want the ease that I want. I want the nice car. I've saved up for it. But on the other side, if I know that I'm contributing to not only individual harm, but potential global catastrophe, what is my religious duty here? And this is why we bring up this subject, because there is a burgeoning field called climate law. Just like you have other types of law, there is also a burgeoning field now which is called climate law as well. Other types of law you'll be very, very well acquainted with. Sometimes a person here, is anyone here a lawyer? No? That's surprising. They didn't want to come tonight. Small community, mashallah. But very noble, very talented, professional community as well. Might be tax law, right? Criminal law, tort law. Right now there is a burgeoning field in climate law, meaning that there are people who actually train now to become lawyers for the planet. That they can actually sue on behalf of people or on behalf of corporations to the level of the international criminal courts and to the level of national courts as well. And tomorrow we will talk more about this, because there will be certain duties that are corollaries of this, which we'll talk about tomorrow, inshallah. The fact that there is climate law, we can see here that the agreements that are being signed at a national level, as well as the certain duties that are upon us, raises that question from the Islamic perspective. If there are now laws coming into place in the wider society, or we begin to arrive at a pedestal of understanding that our actions have a real world impact on human life, what is the Islamic ruling on some of these issues? As climate lawyers begin to shift the laws that govern us, is it that we're only supposed to follow those laws when climate lawyers create these laws, or national governments create these laws? Or is it that Islam itself was supposed to be at the forefront of these matters? Think about that question. When the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam was present, was he reactive to the challenges, or did he push the idea of change within societies? We talked to yesterday, we said they were burying their daughters alive. Did the Prophet wait for this to become epidemic, and then when people started to come to him and beg for change, then the Prophet said, yeah, you know what, let's stop burying girls alive? Or did he realize that there was a duty, and from the outset, one of the first things that he did was proactively put a law in place and say, stop doing this, and explain the rationality, the logic behind why it was immoral to bury your daughters alive? Which one? Obviously, he was proactive, wasn't he? Islam was always meant to be this. It was always meant to lead. Islam was meant to lead, not be reactive and say, oh, we'll wait for climate lawyers. We'll wait 100 years until society creates climate law, and then they can start to shift the behaviors of people slowly, and then maybe Muslims will start to participate in this most important movement of our era. Or was Islam, as envisioned by the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam, supposed to lead mankind? When I say lead mankind, I mean be the ones who see a challenge within society, create the boundaries, the laws, and then actually lead mankind and say, this is what we are doing, why don't you come along with us? Instead of the rest of the world saying, why don't you Muslims come along with us? Which one was it supposed to be? Were we supposed to be reactive and behind the rest of the world? Or were we supposed to be ahead of the rest of the world, and the rest of the world looks at our morality and says, this is what we want to be part of? Which one? Exactly. You know what the Quran says? The Quran mentions in many places, Allah says that the Muslim Ummah are supposed to be shuhada ala nas. We are supposed to be giving witness to the rest of mankind. We are supposed to be the ones that the rest of mankind can look at and say, this is behavior. This is the example for humankind. Kindly open your Qur'ans to chapter number 10 of the Quran, Surah Yunus. Verse number 14. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us as Muslims, Allah has created us to be the stewards of the planet. Not the ones that are reactive and let the rest of the world lead, and then Muslims go, oh yeah, now 100 years later we'll follow the trend. Now we'll make a positive impact in the world. Verses 13 and 14, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَلَقَدْ أَهْلَكْنَا الْقُرُونَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَمَّا ظَلَمُوا. And certainly we destroyed generations before you because they were unjust, when they were unjust. وَجَاءَتْهُمْ رُسُلُهُمْ بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَمَا كَانُوا لِيُؤْمِنُوا. And their apostles had come to them with clear arguments. They would not believe. كَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْقَوْمَ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. Thus do we recompense the guilty people. Now verse 14, listen to this verse. ثُمَّ then جَعَلْنَاكُمْ. Allah is addressing the Muslims. جَعَلْنَاكُمْ. We made you خَلَائِفَ فِي الْأَرْضِ مِنْ بَعْدِهِمْ. Then we made you the khulafa on the earth. The khulafa here are not only Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam, it's kum, to all of you. ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ. We made you, the Muslim Ummah, خَلَائِفَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. Stewards in the world. People who are supposed to lead the world. People who are supposed to give direction and governance to this planet. ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ خَلَائِفَ فِي الْأَرْضِ مِنْ بَعْدِهِمْ. After those generations that we destroyed, لِنَنْظُرَ كَيْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ. So that we may see how you behave and act. Allah Jalla Jalaluhu wants to see how we behave. Were we supposed to be behind climate law, climate scientists, climate lawyers? Or was Islam and Sharia supposed to actually be at the forefront of understanding these matters? Lead with its Sharia, lead with its ahkam and its fiqh, and show the planet the expectations of the behaviors that we're supposed to have. This is what we'll talk about tonight, inshallah. So what we'll do tonight is we will pick on two masail that would potentially be in a bona fide chapter of climate law from a fiqhi Shi'i perspective. There are many, many masail that will come up. And certain questions have to be asked. For example, if the nation that I live in signs up to a climate law agreement, am I as a citizen bound by that as well? Or can I do something outside of that? There are certain questions we're going to ask. And the two questions we're going to ask tonight in terms of trying to scope out this body of fiqh. The first one will be, what we mentioned yesterday, is that if methane is the single largest contributor to global warming, does that necessitate us to reduce that emission? Now, methane primarily comes from the meat industry. The amount of meat that we are consuming is the single largest contributor to global warming in this planet. And if we are supposed to stop harm, and this is the biggest harm to the planet, what duty do I have when it comes to either meat being haram for me or being makruh for me? Are there ayat and ahadith and examples about the reduction of meat and the duty of reduction of meat in the context of the potential of harm? Well, this is what we'll scope out tonight, inshallah. Number one. Mas'ala number two, if scientists are saying urgent action is required, including things like climate activism, are we permitted to be participating in climate activism? Okay, well, someone will say, well, of course you're allowed to protest. No problem. But what happens when climate scientists say protest alone is no longer sufficient? In order to be able to get your message across, you need to be able to do civil disobedience, break the law in order to be able to get your message across. Is it permissible in Shia Islam for me to break the law in civil disobedience for the purpose of climate activism? Yes or no? We'll talk about these two masail tonight, inshallah, and we'll do it as a class. We'll look at the ayat and the ahadith that actually scopes out the potential of the answers to these discussions with your blessings and allowed salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So before we discuss these two masail, I have to predicate it with some disclaimers. Disclaimer number one, if I give you an opinion or an insight or a legislative argument, I am not a hujjah upon you. So you can't say, Jaffer Ladak said X, therefore it is the sharia for me to do X. If I argue a case and say, in this light, it might be wajib, or it might be mustahab, or it might be haram, I am not your marja, I'm not your mujtahid. So immediately a disclaimer that says, no matter what we talk about, all I'm doing is giving you the examples of what might be debated. Right? Ultimately, you still have to go back to your marja. Disclaimer number one. Disclaimer number two, all we are doing at the moment is showing you how this body of law might be scoped. And of course, this is not a Bahth al-Kharij class, which one mas'ala might take weeks to discuss. I'm literally going to give you something for 10, 15, 20 minutes. So the fact that I speak to you about certain ayat and ahadith or certain ways that we may debate or interpret this mas'ala, please don't for a second think that this is the finality of the discussion, right? Don't say that this is what I learned from the pulpit and this is the entirety of the discussion. Normally, in a Bahth al-Kharij class, you might take days, weeks to just discuss one mas'ala from all the potential angles that might come up. It's not possible for us to be able to do that tonight. We are only talking about it for 20 minutes. So disclaimer number two, please keep that in the context and in your mind, that I'm only just going to give you certain things that are pertinent to the discussion and also pertinent to the audience that we have. We have many people who are young, many people who have never sat in a Hawza class, so we don't know what these things include. So please take it in the context, in the spirit in which it's being given to you, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Number one, if the science tells us that methane release is the single biggest planetary harm, and we are not permitted to create and cause harm to others, in this, does it cause a conflict such that it necessitates me to either stop eating meat or to reduce me from eating meat? What is the potential Shari'i position and the potential bahath discussion that we would have from a fiqhi perspective? The first thing we have to ask ourselves is, what is the scientific consensus on this position? Is there a scientific consensus? And what does the science tell us about the release of methane? The difference between methane and CO2, simply put, I know there's a lot of engineers here, scientists here, and I feel embarrassed and ashamed talking about this when it's not my area of expertise. But inshallah, those of you who are more qualified can come and guide me, or those who are interested can continue to read up on these subjects. Simply put, in terms of collecting heat within the planet, methane is a thicker gas than CO2, which means that when we release heat into the atmosphere, the methane collects the heat and traps the heat more than what the CO2 does. It's much thicker than the CO2. To what extent is it thicker and more harmful for the planet? Again, at a very limited basis to my understanding, the argument says that methane in shorter spans is more dangerous than CO2. In terms of heat being trapped, methane will trap this heat for about 20 years. And so it is a short-term impact. If you're doing a measurement at 100 years, CO2 is worse for the planet than methane. If you're doing things at a short-term measurement over 20 years, then methane is a far more devastating gas. Okay. What is the difference? If you're going to do it at a 20-year level, according to the science that I have read, methane is 85 times more harmful than CO2 over a period of 20 years. Over a period of 100 years, then it is actually better than CO2. So in the context of the discussion of trying to accord ourselves to the Paris Climate Agreement and stop ourselves from reaching 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial times of planetary warming, the urgency is us upon methane, more so than it is upon CO2. Meaning we have to reduce as much methane release from our planet in the next 20 years, because that does more short-term harm than long-term harm. Also, from a perspective of methane, it is the largest single contributor to global warming. What we mean by that is that it's actually 18% of all the global warming that is being produced by us. That is more than all the cars, all the boats, and all the trains put together. It's a really important statistic. Again, from a scientific perspective, the science is going to inform the importance of this subject, being the urgent challenge of our time. Methane is 18% of all global warming, more than all the cars, all the trains, and all the boats and their CO2 releases put together. So even if we were managing to reduce all the gas-guzzling cars, it still won't be as urgent as reducing the amount of methane that is being produced into our atmosphere. Everybody with me so far? So the argument is very simple. Methane in the short term becomes a more important project reducing this gas release than CO2. Okay, if everybody's with me at that, where does methane come from? Methane comes from the industrial level of farming that we are doing, animal farming that we are creating. Meaning that when we try to produce industrial levels, global industrial levels of beef and chicken, this meat production at a global level is more harmful to the planet than all of the cars, all of the boats, and all of the trains put together. Meaning as much effort is going in to be able to change green industries, green technologies to phase out the gas guzzling cars that we have, by priority, what is more important is stopping or at least reducing, severely reducing the amount of meat that we are producing, the amount of meat that we are eating. Everybody with me? So it is acknowledged to be, in the short term, the most important reduction. And number two, in the short term, it is the scientific demand that we stop producing the amount of meat that we are. Now, not only does this industrial level of farming cause problems in the context of meat, in the context of methane, there are other problems as well. That the amount of space all of this cattle farming, all of this meat industry takes, the amount of crops that it takes, the amount of water that it takes, is unsustainable for us as a human population. I want you to take this analogy into your mind. Let's say you go to any butcher. Let's say you go to the halal butcher, or let's say you go to Walmart, and a person buys one whole chicken. Yes, you go to the shelf, you buy one whole chicken. Not only is there the methane production from the back of that, but there is also the space that that takes, the crops that that takes, and the water usage that that takes in order to raise that chicken from birth, with feeding it and slaughtering it and getting it all the way to your table. There is a cost, isn't there? What is the cost? If you were to go to that butcher, or you were to go to Walmart and you buy that chicken, take a bottle of water and spill it onto the floor. Then take another 1,000 bottles of water and spill that onto the floor. That is the amount of water it has taken from beginning to end for you to have that whole chicken in your hand. And why is that of concern? Because as a planet, as a human species, the amount of water it is taking for us to be able to make these crops and to feed these animals in order to be able to reach us is now causing a huge imbalance in our ability to provide water for other human beings. There are parts of this world that don't have access to water or have reduced amounts of water in their countries, in our nations. And one of the arguments being made by scientists is that the amount of water being shifted here to be able to provide this industry has increased so much that actually it reduces from the amount of water that is available for human beings. Add to that, that demand per person in this world for meat is actually going up. As more nations begin to industrialize and go towards a sort of middle class economy, their demand also goes up. Their expectations shift. What they want to eat also shifts as well. The person who earns more money tends to be able to buy different types of food. So certain nations, particularly in China and even in India, by the way, which are literally 2 billion people from this planet, the amount of demand for meat per person is increasing. And the amount of water to provide that meat, therefore, is also increasing, which means the amount of water that is available for human consumption is decreasing. Do you understand? So not only is it the methane pollution, the space pollution, but also the water damage that is being done to the planet as well, to the resource that is being done to the planet. Therefore, scientists argue that in terms of the conservation of the planet, the overall ecological health of the planet, the single most important response has to be either the removal of meat from our diet or a scaling back, a severe scaling back of the amount of meat that we are eating into our diets. Okay, let us make an assumption for a second. Let us say this science is correct. Let us say the science is true. Let us say that there is an overarching consensus or an agreement that this is the case. You are the scientist. You visit Najaf, or you visit Qum, and you visit Karbala, and you go to the Hawza Ilmiya, and you book the appointment with the marja of the time. You sit in front of His Eminence Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Hussein al-Sistani. May Allah preserve him for us. Or you sit in front of His Eminence Imam al-Mujahid Sayyid Ali Khamenei. May Allah preserve him for us. Or you sit in front of any marja, and you say to him, Sayyidina, Shaykhna, I'm a scientist. I'm an expert in my field without any, ananiya. I'm just saying, I'm recognized here. I'm a NASA scientist, or I'm an expert in Princeton or wherever. And I am telling you, the single biggest harm that there is to the planet is this. It is urgent that we either stop eating meat or we severely reduce it, because otherwise, millions of people are going to be at harm. Hundreds of thousands of people are going to die. There's going to be refugee crisis off the back of this. This is the current situation, and this is how bad it's going to get in 20 years. This is how bad it's going to get in 50 years. This is how bad it's going to get in 100 years. Marja, tell me, what is the mas'ala here? We, the scientific community, are demanding a shift away from this. What does the marja say? How does the marja use the ayat, the ahadith, the jurisprudential principles to be able to debate this particular mas'ala? Can you see? This is how we would scope out the potential of a bona fide fiqh of bi'ah, of environment and climate law, inshallah. If you understand the mas'ala now, we'll go to the answers, or how we might scope out some answers with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. As you know, every marja's methodology differs. What is generally accepted as an underlying methodology is that whatever is in the Quran is permanent, and whatever is in the ahadith was temporary, can be shifted, can be changed. And that's particular to the context of food. So what you'll find is that in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned certain things that are haram foods for us. Correct? It's haram for you to eat pig. It's haram for you to drink alcohol. But there are other things that are mentioned within the ahadith. Some maraji consider them haram, some consider them mubah. For example, lobster. For some of you, lobster will be haram based on your marja. For some of you, lobster will be permitted based upon your marja's opinion, correct? So the assumption that many marajat make is that what is in the Quran is a permanent hurma. What is mentioned in the ahadith is a temporary hurma, or what is makruh. Some also say it is haram. So there's some methodology here. Now, in the history of Islam, the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam have made things temporarily haram where there has been great harm if you take that thing. Let me just repeat it so that you all hear it. Quran tends to be, they will say, what is permanently haram. With me? What is in the ahadith can be made haram temporarily, depending on the situation, depending on the need. The Prophet and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam on many occasions would make something temporarily wajib or temporarily haram. they would make it temporarily wajib. Why? Because there was a necessity for you to do that act in the short term. And sometimes they would make something haram because it was necessary for you to avoid that thing, even if it be for one period of time. It could be 1 month, it could be 1 year, it could be 1 decade. But the hadith allowed for that flexibility. You all with me? Should I give you some examples to make it clear? Yeah? Okay, let me give you a couple of examples to make it clear, inshallah. I'll give you 1 or 2 examples of how Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam would make something temporarily wajib or temporarily haram, and then we go back to the mas'ala of reducing meat and whether we would be obligated to reduce meat because it is causing so much devastation and harm to the planet. I'll give you 1 or 2 narrations, and you can see how flexible the Sharia is, how flexible the fiqh is in accordance with the necessity of the time. Are you all with me? Yeah, sure? I hope it's not too boring for you, huh? It's interesting or it's not interesting? Interesting? Allahumma salli ala. Okay, let's give you an example. We'll give a couple of fun ones to make sure everybody's with me. Did you know that there was a time in early Islam when it was wajib for you to dye your beard black? Did you know this? Yes or no? Did you know this or you didn't know this? You know this? You heard this? Rest of you don't know this? Okay, very interesting. As you can see, some of us are getting older. Yes? Some of you, mashallah, still very black beards. May Allah keep you that way for a long time. But some of us, mashallah, we need a bit of color. There was a mas'ala that the Prophet made where the early mu'mineen, it was wajib for them to dye their beards black. Why? What do you think? Any ideas? Look more young. For whom? Ahsan. I thought you were going to say for your wife. Yes. So it should have been that you have to dye your beard so that you look younger for your wife. No, this wasn't the masala. The mu'mineen were in a state of war. And at that time, particular to this mas'ala, they were at war with many of the Jewish tribes in the city of Medina al-Munawwarah. The early mu'mineen had many elderly warriors in their army. If you arrived on the battlefield looking old, the enemy would be enthused by that, thinking that we are facing not young warriors, we are facing elderly people on the battlefield, and therefore the enemy would be more enthused, more confident, and this might actually cause harm to the Muslims in terms of their battle. You understand? Do you understand or you don't understand? Yeah, you understand? In order to make sure that when the Jewish armies met the Muslims on the battlefield and they saw the enemy, the Prophet temporarily made it wajib, dye your beard black so that you look younger, so that you don't give extra confidence to the enemy. You understand? Now think about this very carefully. Isn't it amazing that the Prophet can temporarily make something like dyeing the beard wajib? Mentioned in Nahj al-Balagha, once someone comes to Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi. Someone comes to Amir al-Mu'mineen and he sort of accuses Imam Ali alayhi salam of leaving the sunnah of the Prophet. This is mentioned in the books of Hadith. Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, the sunnah of the Prophet was to dye your beard black. You are the Khalifa. Why are you not dyeing your beard black? Surely you, of all the people, the Caliph and the brother of the Prophet should know this mas'ala. Can you imagine? The ordinary person thinks he knows more than Ali ibn Abi Talib. Ali ibn Abi Talib responded by saying, he did make this injunction, but it was a temporary injunction. When the mu'mineen were in minority and they had many elders in battle, in order to be able to preserve their strength and make them look like they were younger, the Prophet told them, dye your beards black. Now today the Muslims are in majority, there is no need to uphold that same mas'ala. I can read it to you, even from alislam.org. It's so well known, even here mentioned. I'm reading to you from alislam.org, the English translation. There is a tradition of the Holy Prophet, quote, with the help of hair dye, turn your old age into youth so that you do not resemble the Jews. This is another version of the same hadith. When Imam Ali alayhi salam was asked to comment on this tradition, he said that in the early stages of Islam, Muslims were very few in number. The Holy Prophet told them to look young and energetic and not to adopt the fashion of the Jews who used to have long flowing white beards. The Muslims were in minority then, now they are strong and powerful. They do not need to take up this mas'ala, they can have whatever color beard they want. Now why am I telling you this? Because if we want to understand the flexibility of fiqh, to implement a short-term mas'ala to protect people from something or to necessitate something, before we even come to the potential of hurma of meat or kiraha of meat temporarily whilst it's causing great harm to the planet, you might say, how can we put an injunction? How can mujtahid put an injunction? You can't make haram what is halal. I've heard this hadith many times. People will say, halal of Muhammad, halal ila yawmil qiyamah. Haram Muhammad, haram ila yawmil qiyamah. How can you make something that is halal haram? You can't do this. Actually, in the fiqh, Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam would temporarily make things wajib and temporarily make things haram in accordance with the need of the situation of the time. This was one example from the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. Should I give you one more example? Or two more examples? Just to make it easy, just so you're all in agreement and you understand that this is how the fiqh may work. I'm not giving fatwa, I'm just giving you a bit of a dars. Hadith comes to us about the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. This is mentioned in the book Al-Kafi, which is our most important compilation of ahadith from His Eminence Shaykh Al-Kulaini rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh. I'll read the hadith to you in Arabic, and in case anyone wants the original and you want to cite it or you want to know it. Hadith says the following. Inna Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi lam ya'dhan li Hakim ibn Hizam bit-tijara hatta dhamina lahu iqalatin nadim. There was a important businessman, very famous businessman in Medina, Mecca, by the name of Hakim ibn Hizam. He was one of the most powerful businessmen of the time. There was something called iqalat al-nadim that Islam introduced or emphasized early on as the Prophet started to gain more authority inside the marketplaces and had authority of how to structure an economy. You know, things like riba was banned, things like alcohol were banned. One mas'ala is called iqalat al-nadim. Iqalat al-nadim means, I'm going to use a simple word that you all know it, buyer's remorse. You all know what buyer's remorse is? Yeah? It means that when you buy something, later on you regret it. When you regret it, you want to go and return it back to the shop that you bought it from. I don't need this anymore. I bought it, but I don't think I need it anymore. If you go back, let's say you buy something from Target. You walk into Target, there's always that front desk, isn't there? Exchanges, refunds, all that. And you go to them and say, listen, I don't want this anymore. You hand over the receipt. Within 30 days, the item is unopened. Are you allowed to return it? Yes or no? Yes. Did you know prior to Islam, in the Arab markets, they would forbid you from returning the item? This is called iqalat al-nadim. The regret of the buyer who wants to be able to return the item that they bought in haste, or they didn't realize that actually they don't really have the money to afford it, or they bought it and the person doesn't need the item anymore. If before Islam, you would have that situation and you went back to the marketplaces, you would not be permitted to return the item. Look at the hadith. I'm reading again to you. Inna Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, the Prophet, lam ya'dhan, he did not permit, li Hakim ibn Hizam, bit tijara, he prohibited Hakim bin Hizam, one of the most powerful, important businessmen of the time. He did not permit him to do any tijara, any trade, hatta dhamina lahu iqalatan nadim, until he would guarantee the Prophet that he would actually allow for a return of the item that was sold from his businesses. Think about that very carefully. If you're a businessman and you have people underneath you, you're responsible for them. If you're a businessman, you have a family, you have to earn, correct? It's wajib for you to earn as a father, as a husband, correct? It's wajib for you to earn for your family, yes? The Prophet could, with his powers, ban you from your own trade, from being a businessman. Why? Just because you weren't following one particular rule. He could make it haram for you to do your business because you weren't following a rule. SubhanAllah, the Prophet would do this. Now, why didn't he stop everyone? If there's 50 businessmen, the Prophet should have stopped all business people, right? And said, all of you, you cannot do any business until you start doing iqalat and nadim. If someone regrets what they purchased from you, they have to be able to have a return policy. He only forbade one person, Hakim ibn Hizam. You know why? Because Hakim ibn Hizam, according to my understanding, was probably, it's like he was the most influential businessman. It's like if Elon Musk does something, everybody else follows. You understand what I mean? If Bill Gates does something, many people will follow his business practices and behaviors. Say, oh, he's doing this, I'll do this as well. Oh, if he can get away with this bad behavior, then I can get away with this bad behavior too. It was like that. Hakim ibn Hizam was one of the most famous, powerful businessmen. The Prophet banned him, knowing that if he could change his behavior, everybody else would follow. You understand? Can you see how flexible the fiqh was? That in the hands of the Prophet, he could actually make something haram for you or for a group of people because I need you to change your behaviors. Because if you can change your behaviors, we can bring in a moral economy where someone who buys something and regrets it, they have the right to be able to return it back to you. Unless and until I am harsh with you, unless and until I actually forbid you from doing these things, business, you will not change your behaviors. So I will actually stop you from doing business in order to change an entire society's business practices. This is an example, again, from the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. You understand how flexible the fiqh was in the hands of the Prophet? He could temporarily make something wajib, like dyeing your beard, and he could make something temporarily haram, like you being in business, until you change your ways, because the community needed to change your ways. Did you know these hadith before? Yes or no? Can you see? Can you understand how fiqh worked? What the potential of the fiqh? Forget now just how fiqh was at the time of the Prophet himself. How he had flexibility to understand what is going on in society, why I need to change behaviors and protect people, and then I can implement a law temporarily and change people's behaviors and then lift the law off their shoulders. This was at the time of the Prophet. Okay. Now, I said to you yesterday, I had some fun with you yesterday. I said, do you believe Ahlul Bayt alayhim wasallam has spoken about global warming? And a few of you said, yeah, of course. It's Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Do you remember that hadith I gave to you yesterday? Imam al-Rida alayhi salam said, قَبْلَ هَذَا الْأَمْرِ بُيُوحٍ. Before the advent of the 12th Imam will be excessive heat, excessive warming. Now, would it surprise you if I told you that there was a time when Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam temporarily banned the eating of meat in order to protect people from harm? Did you know this? Anyone know this? Okay. So what's the mas'ala we're discussing? I just showed you how the sharia, the fiqh can be flexible. Now we're going back to the mas'ala itself. Methane, according to scientific consensus, is the single biggest contributor to global harm. The scientist comes to the marja and says, Ya Sayyid, Ya Shaykh, I am saying to you as a scientist, we need to stop eating meat or severely reduce it such that we can get back within planetary boundaries and stop methane production at such high levels. What say you? The mujtahid will know that there was actually two narrations, sound, sahih narrations, where Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam temporarily banned people from eating meat because there was a greater harm that would come about if they ate meat. Is it possible to use this hadith? Well, I'm not the mujtahid and I'm not your marja, but I'm just showing you how potentially the mujtahid might work. Would you like to know this hadith? Yes? Okay. I'll read it to you both in Arabic and then in English, inshallah, in case anyone wants to note it or you want to search it for yourself or you want the evidence for yourself. Hadith comes to us from our fifth holy Imam, Muhammad al-Baqir, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. Hadith is mentioned twice, once from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, the second one, the sixth Imam asks the fifth Imam about the narration. So I won't read both to you because they're identical, but I'll read to you this first one from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. Everybody with me? The companion, Sa'ala Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. The companion asks Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, An akli lahmil humuril ahliya. He asks Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam about eating domesticated donkey, specifically. An lahmil humuril ahliya. Domesticated donkey. So not wild donkey, domesticated donkey. Is it permissible to eat it or not eat it? Yabna Rasulillah, O Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. Listen to the response. Qala alayhi salam. Naha Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi an akliha yawma Khaybar. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi temporarily prohibited the eating of domesticated donkey at the Battle of Khaybar. Why? He temporarily prohibited it because it was a means of transporting people and weapons to the front line. You understand? Donkey was used to take people to the Battle of Khaybar, to take weapons to the Battle of Khaybar. If you ate all the donkeys, how would the Muslims get to the Battle of Khaybar to fight for Islam? How would they have got there? They wouldn't have been able to get there. That was their mode of transport. Do you understand? So if we killed 100 donkeys to eat it, what would have happened? Would there have been greater harm or less harm? Greater harm. Why greater harm? Because the Muslims wouldn't have been able to protect the Ummah. The Muslims would have been defeated in battle because less Muslims would have come to the battlefront. So the Prophet himself temporarily banned the eating of a certain type of meat because potentially there was more harm than good. Subhanallah. The level of hadith that are available to us from Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam is so intriguing, isn't it? So you're now the scientist, you come to the marja. The marja says, well, you know what? There was a narration, there is a sahih narration. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam said that the Prophet temporarily banned eating a certain type of meat because there was potentially more harm in it if you ate that meat. Then, after the Battle of Khaybar, and it was no longer the means of transport, and the Muslims became richer, and now they can use camels and horses and not be reliant on donkeys, then the Prophet permitted for you to kill and slaughter donkey and eat donkey meat. You see, the prohibition on the meat was temporary. When the situation abated, the Prophet could remove the temporary prohibition and everybody could carry on with their lives. Ask the marja as an example. Ya Sayyid, Ya Shaykh, this is the gravest issue of our time. If we are saying as a scientific community, we must stop eating meat temporarily or reducing eating meat temporarily, what is your opinion? Is it possible that we can cite this hadith from the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam? Now, as I said to you before, disclaimer, number one, I'm not giving you fatwa. And I'm not saying don't serve meat here. But can you see that if we actually had an active fiqh here, if we had a bona fide law and we had the experts coming to marja and debating and presenting these masail, it's very possible that the marja could actually make an intervention here. Now, there'll be many, many other issues to take into consideration. As I said, I'm only speaking for 20 minutes on this. You know, if you stop people from eating meat, what will happen to their health? If we stop meat industry, there are many people who will lose their jobs. Can you see? Do we have to ban it altogether, or can we reduce it to within a planetary number that keeps us safe? What does that mean? The Prophet used to eat meat once every 40 days. You know that, right? It's a very famous hadith that the smoke coming from the chimney of the house of the Prophet would only occur once every 40 days, meaning he only ate meat once every. So is it possible to shift it in accordance with this? As I said, I'm not making fatwa. I'm opening you up to the ways in which we can think about this masala. But if we don't change our behavior, forget marja, forget fiqh now. If we don't change our behavior, we are contributing to planetary harm. We are going to be an indirect conduit to death and destruction. We are. That's the scientific consensus. That's the agreement. So forget whether Jaffer Ladak says it or Ayatollah Sistani says it. You cannot turn around now on the day of judgment and say, oh Allah, I was not aware of it. As a community, we should be aware of our behaviors. We should be aware of what we are purchasing and presenting within the Husseiniya. This should be the place where proper Islam is practiced. Correct? In terms of the polystyrenes, the plastics, our recycling, and even including the meat intake that we have. It shouldn't be that we're doing things that harms the planet. We should be doing things as best a practice as possible within our Husseiniya. Why? Because if we cannot practice Islam proper here, then where are you going to find proper Islam? If you can't show the children and the youth and families how to organize yourselves in accordance with Islam and diet and the times in which we live in here, then where is it going to be? In school? In your offices? In the universities? Where should it start? Here inside the Husseiniya. This is a Najaf center, a Najaf center. You've named it in honor of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. If we can't have the best practice in the name of Ali ibn Abi Talib here, then where are we going to have best practice? Can you see? So here, we have to be able to think about our behaviors and the ways in which we try to change things, inshallah. I hope you appreciate what I'm trying to suggest. And we can continue the discussion with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. With your permission, I want 5 minutes to mention the second mas'ala. Is that okay? So the second mas'ala was what? activism in the way of climate change. When I say activism here, I don't mean things like simply protesting. Protesting is permissible. Your government allows you to protest, correct? You can take to the street, have a placard, participate in protest. The question we have is it permissible to do civil disobedience? Isyan al-madani in the Arabic. Are you allowed to break a law in order to be able to get your point across as part of your protest and activism? This is a mas'ala. Why? Because as you know, many of the maraji' will say, you have to follow the laws of your country. So the country doesn't give you permission to be able to break its law as part of its protest. So is it permitted or is it not permitted? Well, the argument of climate scientists, those who are activists, will say that it is such an urgent situation that we need to be able to get our message across, otherwise we will not have the opportunity to get the word out quick enough and change people's behaviors. In the UK, there's several climate activist groups that don't just do protests, they do civil disobedience. And because of my proximity to this subject and those groups, I was asked, would you participate in civil disobedience in order to get the urgency of the climate issues across? So immediately my mind said, well, I can't tell you yes and I can't tell you no, because I need to know what the marja says. Does my marja permit me to do civil disobedience? It's a mas'ala, isn't it? It's part of the ahkam shar'iyya. Am I allowed to break the law in the name of preserving planet, preserving life, or not? So, when I went to Najaf, I went to the offices of many of the maraji' and I asked this question, and now I want to be able to feed back to you what the answers were to me. Okay? Now, just to give you some scope of the question before I give you the answers as to the opinions of our maraji' al-kiram. When we say climate disobedience or civil disobedience, what do I mean as an example? As a specific example, there are people who, in the UK, will glue themselves to the road in order to stop those businesses that are abusers of the planet from being able to do their business. As an example, pick a business and this business uses its trucks. Let's say BP. You all know BP, right? Yes? Or Amazon. Uses its trucks. It's known as one of the 90 big, there's an actual, some work that's been done by Princeton University on the 90 biggest climate abusers, the 90 biggest corporations of climate abuse in the world. So sometimes they actually glue themselves to the road in order to stop the trucks going out. It doesn't do anything in the real world, right? Stopping one truck, 10 trucks, does nothing. On a global scale, it doesn't really change anything, does it? It doesn't do anything. But what they're trying to do is raise awareness of the urgency of the crisis. Now, what happens? If you glue yourself to the road, the police come. What do the police do? The police give you a pat on the back? What do? They arrest you. So this is civil disobedience. Now imagine, let me reword the question, because I know you shook your head. Let's say, because it's coming up to 60 years since the death of Martin Luther King, right? Or 60 years since his march on Washington, correct? You've all seen that in the news, right? Yes? So let's say you, at that time, you wanted to sit at the back of that bus, or you wanted to sit at the front of that bus. Or let's say you were going to do civil disobedience in order to get civil rights, equality between black and white. Imagine you went to the marja. You said, it's not permissible by law for me to drink at this water fountain. But I'm going to do it anyway. It's not permissible for me to sit on this part of the bus. It's not permissible for me to take a slave and free them in underground. Do you see what I mean? Those things were breaking the law back then, weren't they? What would the marja say? I don't know, I can't answer. It's 60 years ago, it's 100 years ago. But you know that if you found a slave running away and you tried to give them freedom, then that was a banned act, wasn't it? But you did it for a greater cause. What was the greater cause? Freedom of that slave. Or you drank from that water fountain. It was illegal. They would have set the dogs on you. If you would have marched with Martin Luther King, they would have sprayed you with cannons of water. You would have done some civil disobedience. Was it prohibited, haram, or permissible for you to participate in that? What do you think? Wow. If you say it's permissible then, because it's civil rights that you're fighting for, equality between black and white, now this is even more important. You're protecting the whole planet. You're protecting species. You're protecting 7.2 billion lives. Oh Shaykh, oh Sayyid in Najaf, in Qom, what is your opinion? Am I allowed to glue myself to the road, for example, in order to try to protect the planet? Yes or no? Very interesting, isn't it? Can you imagine me trying to explain this to the marja in Najaf? It wasn't easy. And I'm telling you, it wasn't easy. Now, by the way, I'll tell you in a minute what the answer was. If you want to check this guy out, you can check him out by the name of Peter Kalmus. Kalmus. Search him if you want on your phone and check him out later. He's a NASA climate scientist. So he's no joke. He's not only working for NASA, but he's a climate scientist for NASA. So he's a specialist in the highest rank in his fields. He argues on the necessity of civil disobedience, and he himself actually does civil disobedience. You can see in his bio, he's done things like handcuff himself in airports to try to raise awareness of the need to stop flights because it is a big polluter of CO2. And he actually mentions his argument, and I'm reading to you from his own words. He says, that action went pretty viral. Handcuffing himself in an airport to try to stop flights. How many flights are you going to stop as one person? Every day there's 10,000 flights in the air, there's 100,000 flights in the air. He's not going to do anything. That action went pretty viral, and I think it raised a lot of awareness about how JP Morgan Chase is the institution on our planet that does the most to fund new fossil fuel projects. So he will do things like chain himself or throw paint, as an example, on JP Morgan Chase, on the building, as an example. Civil disobedience, you'll get arrested for it. He argues it is a necessity, and he's the expert in his field. So, I went to Najaf, and I went to offices of 3 Grand Maraja, and I asked them this question. Is it permissible for us to do civil disobedience, particularly in the cause of climate change and preserving the planet? In all occasions, none of the offices of the Maraja understood the question. I'm just being frank with you. They didn't understand the question, and I don't mean in terms of language. I mean the notion, the idea. They couldn't understand it. I won't say which one of the 3 offices. One of them responded and said, of course it's permissible. You're allowed to protest in the West. They give you permission to go on the streets. I said, no, I'm not talking about protest. Civil disobedience, breaking the law. In all 3 occasions, we had to explain that this happens in the West, that there are actually groups that do this. Muslims participate in this, and as a Shia, I am asking you for your verdict, for your jurisprudential verdict. The point I'm trying to emphasize to you is that of all the 3 mujtahids, none of them heard of this before, None of them knew that this was an act that occurs in the West. Why am I saying this to you? Because a NASA climate scientist is saying it is necessary, and he does it, and it goes viral, whereas 3 of the leading mujtahideen of Najaf hadn't even heard about this. It's very important that you take these things into consideration. When we talk about how much that they know, why did I say yesterday participatory law? Because on many occasions the maraji and mujtahideen don't know what is happening in these fields. They require you to tell them what is happening. And then they can start to think about these things. They don't have ilm al-ghayb. They themselves will tell you, when it comes to making fatwa, we don't have ilm al-ghayb. We need you to inform us of what is going on. And then we use the resources, the ahadith, the ayat, the principles to make the fatwa. Okay. I asked personally, Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Rida Sistani, the son of Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Hussein Sistani, in his office in Najaf. I asked Ayatollah Ali Sabzawari in Najaf, and I asked Ayatollah Sheikh Murtada Shirazi, who is the representative of Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Sadiq Shirazi. That's these 3 in Najaf. All 3 gave different opinions. And all 3 gave different reasonings for their opinions. You ready? Sayyid Sistani's son, Sayyid Muhammad Rida Sistani, he replied, what do you think? Yes or no? In the view of Sayyid Sistani, is it permissible for you to do civil disobedience in climate change? Yes or no? Hands up, who says yes? It's about 6 of you, 7 of you. Who says no? Much more. It's about 3 times as many. According to Sayyid Muhammad Rida Sistani, it is not permissible to do civil disobedience. And he cited a reason. There is a principle in fiqh called qa'idatun nizam, the principle of preserving order within society. And because qa'idatun nizam, the principle of preserving order in society, is sacrosanct, it is not permissible for you to do something that will break the order of society, such as gluing yourself to the ground, gluing yourself to a plane, throwing paint on JP Morgan Chase, whatever it may be, that might be cited as an example of civil disobedience. So, according to His Eminence Sayyid Sistani, Dama Tawfiquhu, it is not permissible for you to do civil disobedience. Now, I raised the question earlier to clarify. I asked you, if you were to do civil disobedience in terms of your civil rights, what would they have said 50 or 70 or 100 years ago? Think about these things very carefully, huh? Sayyid Sistani says, no. Number 2, the opinion of Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Sabzawari. May Allah bless him. What do you think he said? Yes or no? Hands up, how many says yes? It's even less now. We've gone from 6 to, actually we've got increased number. We've got increased in number. We've got about 9 of you that said yes. According to Sayyid Ali Sabzawari's position, yes. It would be permissible for you to do civil disobedience for climate on the shart, on the condition that the experts, what he calls the mutakhassisin, the experts in the field of climate law tell you it is now required for you to do this. That's interesting, isn't it? Because I just gave you the example of Peter Kalmus, NASA climate scientist, participating himself in climate disobedience. Sayyid Ali Sabzawari said, yes, on the shart that the mutakhassisin themselves say, yes, this is a requirement now. You yourself can't make the decision. If you're outside of the specialists, you yourself cannot just throw yourself onto the street and cause civil disobedience. The mutakhassis has to tell you, it is required now for you to go and do it. Because his ijtihad says, he is not the expert in climate science. Peter Kalmus is the expert in climate science. If Peter Kalmus informs Ayatollah Sabzawari says, Yes. Second opinion. Third opinion, Sayyid Murtada Shirazi, mujtahid in his own right and representative of Ayatollah Sayyid Sadiq Shirazi. What do you think? Yes or no? Yes? Yes. He said yes, it's permissible. We had a long dialogue, long back and forth, the longest dialogue that we had. He said yes, it's permissible, but on two conditions. Number one, the same condition as Ayatollah Sabzawari. It has to come from the mutakhassisin, the experts in the field. Fine. Number two, listen to this condition. Ayatollah Shirazi believes in something called Shura al-Fuqaha. Consensus and agreement amongst the fuqaha. You know what he said? You have to go to the office of every major marja in the world, get all of them to agree it's permissible, then it's permissible. I said, subhanallah, I can't get the marajid to agree on anything. I couldn't get them to agree on the time of day. Really, I mean, think about how many masail we have. Moon sighting, issues in Hajj, this mas'ala, that mas'ala. And I don't mean it disrespectfully. I'm saying in the real world, there is not a single issue that we can get all the marajid to be able to agree with. As I just showed you, Sayyid Sistani's office in Najaf said, no. Ayatollah Shirazi says he believes in what's called Shurat al-Fuqaha. The fuqaha have to come to an agreement within themselves about the permissibility of something like this. So I have to go to the office of Sayyid Khamenei, Sayyid Sistani, Sayyid Mudarrisi, Sayyid this, Sheikh Fulan. Once they all agree that now is required for civil disobedience, then Sayyid Shirazi will accept it. That was the hardest one to convince. The point I make to you is, can you see how actually these issues are real world issues? When I said to you making a bona fide fiqh of climate law, environmental law, many of the masail have already been discussed in some angle, but there's just no fatawa yet. There's no bahth kharij, there's no bona fide research that has gone into this to produce law. But it's very easy for us to be able to create this. We're on the cusp of it. So if tomorrow your marja, whoever it is, puts out climate law and says this is the law for you, don't be surprised that tomorrow we actually have these laws coming out. Because a lot of research is available, guidance is there, we just now need to be able to structure it accordingly. If you understand, these are real world issues that are facing us and that your children are asking you about and society is demanding from us, we'll then come to realize that actually Shi'i Islam should be at the forefront of providing solutions and not sitting only on the pulpits and in Hawza and talking only about our aqa'id or things that happen in history. But the reality of what's going on the ground, we need to have solutions and answers to. So these were two masail. I hope you've enjoyed this dars, and inshallah tomorrow we will take maybe one or two more and conclude the series inshallah. Tonight, you can remember one of those companions that protested against Yazid bin Muawiyah, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, at the sight of the Sabaya, the captives of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. Is it permissible for you to do civil disobedience, to do something that breaks the nidam, the order of what was occurring? The first martyr amongst the Shia after the 10th of Muharram by the name of Abdullah ibn Afif. Abdullah ibn Afif was a lover of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, and he was inside the court of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad in Kufa. I want you to imagine the state of the Sabaya as they are being paraded, as they are being shouted at and abused. I want you to imagine someone like Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad celebrating as the head of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein is presented to him. And then I want you to imagine a companion like Abdullah ibn Afif sitting inside the Masjid of Kufa and seeing Imam as-Sajjad alayhi salam in chains, seeing Sayyidah Zainab and Kulthum in chains, seeing Sayyidah Ruqayya in chains, seeing how they would mock and laugh at her. Abdullah ibn Afif curses Ibn Ziyad and he says to him, how dare you do this to Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. He speaks up in front of everyone, and because of this, Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad puts Abdullah ibn Afif to death. He suffers the fate. He is beheaded. His body is dragged through the streets of Kufa. He becomes the very first martyr amongst the Shia after the event of Karbala. I want you to imagine that inside Damascus, the Sabaya are sat in front of Yazid. Yazid has a stick and he's poking the head of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. He has a glass of wine and in his drunken stupor he knocks over the wine. This is towards the blessed head of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. This is in Damascus, where the enemies are laughing at Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. It comes to a moment where Yazid sees a man from amongst the Sabaya. He says, who are you? He says, I am Ali ibn al-Hussein. Yazid says, but I thought we killed Ali ibn al-Hussein on the battlefield. He says, that was my brother Ali al-Akbar. I am Ali Zayn al-Abidin as-Sajjad. He says, then maybe you too should be killed. He wants to strike Imam as-Sajjad alayhi salam down. Zainab alayhi salam has to stand up and say, oh Yazid, you will have to kill me before you kill Zayn al-Abidin. I stop you from this act. This is how Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam was saved from the hands of the tyrant. Ala la'natullahi ala al-qawmi al-zalimin. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. Please raise your hands, join me in dua. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, to allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our death. If we were to pass away from this world before his coming, Ya Allah, raise us from our graves so that we can partake in the victories of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Ya Allah, there are many people around the world going through such desperate times, those people in a state of war, oppression, poverty, homelessness, disease, and disaster. Grant them more safety, security, and victory for the sake of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask you, Ya Allah, grant us the ziyarah of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam fi dunya wal akhirah, and whatever hajat we have, Ya Allah, accept them. Bihaqqi Ali ibn al-Hussein alayhi salam, Matim Hussein, Ya 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 Hussein,
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein,
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. Bawafa, Ya Abbas, 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 Bawafa, Ya Abbas. Salamu Ghazi, वफा का तू है इमाम गाजी. सलामु गाजी, 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 لبوں پہ تیرا ہی نام غازی وفا کا تو ہے امام غازی سلام غازی سلام غازی وفا کا تو ہے امام غازی تیرے علم کا ہے ہم پہ سایہ علم پہ سایہ ہے پنج تن کا تیرے علم کا ہے ہم پہ سایہ علم پہ سایہ ہے پنج تن کا بلند تیرا مقام غازی وفا کا تو ہے امام غازی سلام غازی سلام غازی وفا کا تو ہے امام غازی علم کو جب سے ہوا ہے سایہ زمین کربو ولا پہ مولا علم کا جب سے ہوا ہے سایہ زمین کربو ولا پہ مولا تیرے ہے چلتا نظام غازی وفا کا تو ہے امام غازی سلام غازی سلام غازی وفا کا تو ہے امام غازی تو با وفا ہے تو لافتہ ہے بے آسروں کا تو آسرا ہے تیرا وفا ہے تو وابستہ ہے بے آسروں کا تو آسرا ہے جہاں میں چرچا ہے عام غازی وفا کا تو ہے امام غازی سلام غازی سلام غازی وفا کا تو ہے امام غازی حسین مولا سے پیار کرنا حسین پر جان نثار کرنا حسین مولا سے پیار کرنا حسین پر جان نثار کرنا یہی ہے تیرا پیام غازی وفا کا تو ہے امام غازی سلام غازی سلام غازی وفا کا تو ہے امام غازی یوں تیرا بازو قلم نہ ہوتے اسیر اہل حرم نہ ہوتے جو تیرا بازو قلم نہ ہوتے اسیر اہل حرم نہ ہوتے نہ جاتی جناب یوں شام غازی وفا کا تو ہے امام غازی سلام غازی سلام غازی وفا کا تو ہے امام غازی جواؤ سرور جوائی سرور برید بازو ابن حیدر جواؤ سرور جوائی سرور برید بازو ابن حیدر تو کیسے کرتا سلام غازی وفا کا تو ہے امام غازی سلام غازی سلام غازی وفا کا تو ہے امام غازی
یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین
یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین ہے جو مجھ آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہر تماچے پہ سکینہ نے ہر تماچے پہ سکینہ نے پکارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ ہر مجھے بالوں سے پکڑ کر ہے تماچے مارے مجھے بالوں سے پکڑ کر ہے تماچے مارے میں نے سرشم سے مانگا جو تمہارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہائے وہ جو دنیا اپنے تحفے میں مجھے بخشی ہے وہ جو دنیا اپنے تحفے میں مجھے بخشے تھے ان کو بے دردی سے ظالم نے اتارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے آپ کے سینے پہ آرام سے سونے والی آپ کے سینے پہ آرام سے سونے والی سو کے اب خاک پہ کرتی ہے گزارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے بابا جب مجھے آپ ہر ساتھ رہباروں کے دوڑایا گیا ہے مجھ کو ساتھ رہباروں کے دوڑایا گیا ہے مجھ کو چور زخموں سے بدن میرا ہے سارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے نو کی نظام سے دیکھوں تو دیکھوں کیسے نو کی نظام سے دیکھوں تو دیکھوں کیسے میرا اصغر تھا مجھے جان سے پیارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا یا حسین یا حسین یا
بہت لیٹ ہو گیا
حیا علی خیر العمل 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 سگرا خیرا منگ دی اکبر ویر دیاں سگرا خیرا منگ دی اکبر ویر دیاں سگرا خیرا منگ دی اکبر ویر دیاں سگرا خیرا منگ دی ਅਕਬਰ ਵੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਸੁਗਰ ਖੈਰਾ ਮੰਗਦੇ 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 ਅਕਬਰ ਵੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਰਾਵ ਤੱਕ ਦੀਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਦੀ ਤਸਵੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਰਾਵ ਤੱਕ ਦੀਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਦੀ ਤਸਵੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਸੁਗਰ ਖੈਰਾ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਅਕਬਰ ਵੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਸੁਗਰ ਖੈਰਾ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਅਕਬਰ ਵੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਸੁਗਰ ਖੈਰਾ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਅਕਬਰ ਵੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਜਾਣੇ ਰੱਬ ਕਿਉਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕਲਿਆ ਛੱਡ ਗਈ ਨੇ ਜਾਣੇ ਰੱਬ ਕਿਉਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕਲਿਆ ਛੱਡ ਗਈ ਨੇ ਦੀਆਂ ਹੋਵਨ ਸਨ ਗਾਜ਼ੀ ਦੇ ਤੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਹੋਵਨ ਸਨ ਗਾਜ਼ੀ ਦੇ ਤੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਸੁਗਰ ਖੈਰਾ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਅਕਬਰ ਵੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਸੁਗਰਾਂ ਨੇ ਖਤ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਆਪਣੇ ਬਾਬਦ ਨੂੰ ਸੁਗਰਾਂ ਨੇ ਖਤ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਆਪਣੇ ਬਾਬਦ ਨੂੰ ਹੋ ਮੁਬਾਰਕ ਅਕਬਰ ਨੂੰ ਜਗੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਹੋ ਮੁਬਾਰਕ ਅਕਬਰ ਨੂੰ ਜਗੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਸੁਗਰ ਖੈਰਾ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਅਕਬਰ ਵੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਸੁਗਰ ਖੈਰਾ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਅਕਬਰ ਵੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਮੇਰੇ ਪਿਓ ਦੀ ਅੱਖੀਆਂ ਮੇਰੇ ਪਿਓ ਦੀ ਅੱਖੀਆਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਵੀਰ ਮੇਰੇ ਪਿਓ ਦੀ ਅੱਖੀਆਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਵੀਰ ਮੇਰੇ ਅੱਖੀਆਂ ਰੋਸ਼ਨ ਰਹਿਣਾ ਸਦਾ ਸ਼ਬੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਅੱਖੀਆਂ ਰੋਸ਼ਨ ਰਹਿ ਸਦਾ ਸ਼ਬੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਖੈਰਾ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਅਕਬਰ ਵੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਸੁਗਰ ਖੈਰਾ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਅਕਬਰ ਵੀਰ ਦੀਆਂ
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Ziyaret. Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, O Abide Dilaneka, O Abide Dilaneka, Tunne se joda bharina, Tunne se joda bharina, Aur jaane ka, jaane ka, Aur jaane ka, jaane ka, Aur Mustafa ki tafsira, Aur Mustafa
أحسنت زيارة بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدتي نساء العالمين السلام عليك يا خديجة الكبرى السلام عليك يا إمام حسن المجتبى السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين
وعلى 9 المعصومين من ذريتك علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي. السلام عليك يا حجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب العصر والزمان سيدي الأمان من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان. السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهور الأمر. السلام عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. كل وليك
الحسن سلاماتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك نورا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على